Hey folks, so I am going to just do a quick run through of some of the course content and some of the expectations for the semester since we were not able to have an in-person class today due to inclement weather. So as mentioned, please excuse my dog in the background. As mentioned at the end of 3515, I tend to mention it in every semester. So regardless of which semester you're coming from, you should have heard this spiel that the 4515 course is not exactly the same as 3515. In fact, it's not the same in any way that really matters. Insofar as the major deliverables or the major deliverable is a group project that you will work on pretty much for the entire semester, but in phases. So if we were to, well, let's just, I guess, start at the beginning, take a look at the syllabus. And I'm going to focus on the major pieces, and that is your grade and how we sort of do the breakdown. So we basically have these three deliverables. We have your final project, which is, as you can see, a whopping 70% of your final grade. We have lab projects. These are, you can think of these as what would originally be our assignments. The lab projects is just kind of a holdover name from when we would distribute them during the labs. That'll be 20%. So for this, you'll have three projects all building on each other, and all of these will be completed in the first half of the semester. 4 quizzes strewn throughout the semester, one in a few weeks and one close to the end of the last one close to the end of the semester, and 2 in between. So as mentioned, your final project is sort of the big piece, and you're going to do this in phases. I'll talk about the phases in a second when I switch back to the other views in Canvas. But this is the part we're going to focus on. The part of the semester that is the same is that I will pretty much give lectures on a set of topics relating to the framework, as well as just broader concepts relating to development, at least mobile development in general. So we're going to start by, again, revisiting the Android framework, some of the core components, but we're going to look at some more involved features, just additional things that we would tack on to what we already know. So we're going to take a new look at services, for example, and see some of the features that are offered, as well as system services, which are kind of like services but aren't. And then, as you're going to see throughout the schedule, there are these little strewn topics, such as so we see project proposals due and presented. So I'm going to talk more about this, but this is part of that first phase of your final group project. So you'll see this kind of scattered throughout the schedule. So we have this, we have, we'll be dealing with runtime permissions, so we're back to framework stuff, GPS and mapping. You can see you'll have your first quiz around the end of week 3. Extra topic, whenever you see extra topic, it is essentially saying, this is a topic we're going to discuss that is not directly related to Android. So here, this is the Unified Modeling Language, i.e. UML. This is a concept that you would have been introduced to in 3515. It's how I would represent certain aspects of an application or of a process. And it usually involves just me drawing a bunch of blocks on the whiteboard. We're going to do a deeper dive in UML, kind of understand it, because you will be doing a set of design documents for your final project. So we're going to cover that as a topic. Other extra topics include, somewhere in here we should see something about databases. I do not see it. Don't know if my eyes are just going back. Oh, here we go. Extra topics. So relational and document databases. Again, because a part of your final project will very likely involve some sort of backend service that is storing data at rest. So a database. So we're going to talk about databases. We're going to go over the basics. And As we go through these topics, relational databases, which here I see it says week 7 and 9, so we may have to move this up, actually. I think this was for a special occasion, but so we'll move this up. But these extra topics will be done alongside your, they'll be introduced alongside your laboratory projects, those 3 assignments you're going to have that you work on independently. And the idea is, while you won't be working on design documents or databases for the system, they will form a part of them, or at least a part of my solution. And in some ways, your application will leverage some of the other artifacts that I will provide, including a database, for example. So you're going to see these components alongside the applications that we work on. And then for your group project, you will do your own instance. So we're going to learn by example with a real application how these things are used, the different forms that they can take, the concepts and the rules involved in using them. So I just wanted to highlight those, but you can see the rest of topics that we're going to basically cover, things like sensors and all of that. One thing I want to make very clear is, because ultimately my covering a topic must necessarily happen in a sequential order that spans the semester, it is not reasonable or practical for you to wait for me to cover a topic if it is ultimately something you're going to use in your final project. So you can expect to, once you have decided on a project idea, to begin your own investigation and research with your team into these components and figuring out the nook and cranny, figuring out how it all works, and essentially becoming the subject matter expert in that specific, or for that specific component, or for that specific feature. So again, I'm talking about a topic, but you aren't waiting on me to have an understanding of the topic. Best case is when I discuss something, whatever I talk about can show up in a quiz, and that will be useful for you, especially if it's not something that you are building in your own application. But anything you're going to be building yourself, you're going to be doing your own research, your own discovery, to figure out how to use it. I'm just going to kind of start you off. So that being said, another difference between 4515 and 3515 is that, quite frankly, except for the first few topics, we don't do as deep a dive into the code, into the framework. Yeah, I might bring examples, but a lot of them might be pre-typed, etc. Simply because we want to focus, instead of on the implementation, we want to focus on the use. There is a heavy focus in 4515 on user experience. What is it that the user is doing? What do they expect? How should your application behave with making certain assumptions about what the user is going to be doing? So that is a whole new layer on top of coding. We assume we know how to code in Android. We know Kotlin. We have the gist of the top level components, activities, services, content providers, and broadcast receivers. Well, we've never covered content providers in the intro course. That is a topic we will cover somewhere in the advanced course. You can find it in this list somewhere. Here it is. So we do cover that as a topic. But again, the understanding is we've gotten the fundamentals under our belt. Now we want to have this higher level discussion about use. So we're very focused on user experience. So that's kind of where we want to, where these talks will go, and not deep dive into coding. So that's another reason why waiting on me is not a necessary step. You can simply go ahead, identify the components you're going to use, and then build on them. So when I say identify a component, why is that important? Why does that matter? Well, so let's switch back to, I think I have the syllabus twice here. Let's just go to home so we can see what's being done. So under assignments, you can see some of essentially the deliverables, as well as the breakdown for the course. Don't pay too much attention to the dates. These are sort of guidelines. They could shift depending on how we're coming along, but here you're going to see some of the deliverables. So we start out with the project proposal. This is going to be a write-up that deals with what you plan to build. So this is just a template for slides that you can put together when you're presenting your idea. So you're going to pitch your idea to me. You're going to workshop it with your group members. Once you've kind of figured out what problem you're trying to solve and everything else, and I give you the green light, I give you the go ahead, you put this together and you present it. Thereafter, we move into the design, creating of the design documents. So we start off with a draft set of design documents that cover some of the topics I'll present to you. You'll submit that for review. I'll give you feedback and comments. You then update your design documents, factoring in that feedback, and then submit your final design documents. That's what's going to be graded ultimately. You'll see what the rubric is for that in a moment. And then later on, you will submit your ER diagram. ER is entity relationship diagram. So this has to do with your data model, your schema, the database aspect of your application. So this comes later. It's not officially, it is not a UML diagram, although in theory you could express an ER diagram using UML notation. So it comes a little later once we're able to cover databases fully. So that's why I mentioned we're going to have to bring up the topic most likely. And then there's a final report. This is the thing that gets graded. This is your project. So here you can see we have a final presentation outline, sort of what you're expected to present on that last day when we do your projects. A report that you submit along with your presentation. Again, this is just details, the boring stuff that you're not going to present, you're not going to talk about in a presentation. And then here is the rubric that talks about how your project is being graded. Remember that all in all, this is 70% of your project. And here you see the elements that we're going to be looking at. The design documents, that's 20% of your project grade. So that's a big chunk. And then an even bigger chunk, and you might think, why is this? Because it turns out this is a place where a lot of teams oftentimes fall down. They design something, but then they build something else. So that's not something that we want to happen here. So your project needs to match the thing that you said you were going to build. You are allowed to iterate. You're allowed to go back to your design documents and make changes, as long as they are not the type of changes that make it seem like you're building a completely different app. That would suggest that your original idea did not get much thought or planning, and we want to avoid that. So yes, you're allowed to go back and make changes, add a class here, remove a class there because you or change some relationships, but you should not submit a design that is fundamentally different from your original submission. And then here we start to check off certain aspects of your application. So we want to make sure that your project is mobile centric. So it utilizes something that makes it uniquely a mobile app, something that you could not build in a website or a desktop application. So that can involve things like near field communication, GPS, one of the more popular sensors or features of mobile apps. But it could be Bluetooth or sensors like motion sensors, environmental sensors, or position sensors. Or, this is your safest bet utilizing one of these. But if you have some other concept, you can make a case as long as you can convince me that this is sufficiently, it has sufficient weight. It's something that's you're going to have to focus on and build. And it is in fact makes it a mobile centric application. We want to look at your use of web APIs. So hitting third-party services, using databases, things like that. So we'll discuss that in more detail as you sort of formulate your ideas, kind of talk about what this portion of your application, your stack should look like. And then look and feel and usability, something that we will focus on. So that's a good 10%. That's a decent chunk of your project. This can be the difference between passing a project and failing it, or getting a B plus or a B and an A. Of course, we want to have testing because this is a real project. So we expect to see testing and test cases as a part of your project. You don't have to do test-driven development. In fact, it is not even an expectation, at least not for this semester. But we do, in fact, expect to see some testing done as a part of your application. This will be submitted at the end. And that's it. I mean, that's the chunk of it. You're going to have your assignments. So here we see 3 assignments. Again, don't pay too much attention to the dates. These can shift. You work on these independently. You can, of course, as was always the case, discuss things with with people, not just your team members. You can have conversations about approaches and solutions, but you're doing your own work here. And then we have 4 quizzes. Again, don't pay attention to the dates. These are just kind of like placeholders to see how we move through the semester. And that's it. Again, this is I'll still show up and talk to you. But ultimately, you will be focused a lot on working with your team, coming up with your idea, building that project. We have something called Developer Days. It was a horrible name from the beginning, but it somehow never changed. And that is where we will simply, in lieu of a lecture for a specific day, you'll be given that time in addition to your lab time. So you'll have a extra time that week to work with your team on whatever deliverable you have. You can expect to have, about 1 developer day per month, possibly more, depending, especially if we have snow days. I almost made today a developer day, but turns out we didn't need to do that. It happened on its own. You just didn't know it was. But it's essentially something like this. When we don't show up for lecture, but rather we work with our teams to sort of build something. And usually the developer days come close to the deadline for a specific deliverable. That tends to be how it works. But again, you can expect to see one or two of those per month. And as always, here you'll see information on the lectures, slides, and any example applications that we'll be working on. So next lecture, we'll be looking at location services in Android, something that, depending on what semester you were with me, you may have already seen me demo it slightly. Now we're going to look at it formally. And then next we'll look at incorporating mapping with location services. So we're planning out our lectures as we go along. I think that's it, more or less. You have a lab. Your TA is going to help you a lot with your projects, your group projects, helping you form your teams to begin with. That'll be this week. And moving into next week, you basically start getting these topics under your belt, working on your assignments, and then planning out your projects. Depending on how many people we have, we may have teams of either 2 or 3 people per team. No individual teams. That's not a thing. So we'll work out the math. You can start discussing it with your TA in your first lab, and then we'll make some final decisions. If no decisions have been made, we'll make some final decisions on Thursday, our first lecture. All right, folks, this is our first class. Glad to have you on board for the CIS 4515 ride. I think it's the more fun version of our mobile application development journey, because this is where you get to express your own creativity. You're not locked into just building what I ask for. You get to conceptualize something and build it. So it usually is a more interesting, I believe, 4 months. So I will see you all on Thursday, and you will see your TA on Wednesday.